Today on the Transplant Helper, we're going to be talking about all things concerning post-transplant recovery. How should you react to such? How should you measure your success? And in the end of this, some things you need to keep in mind in order to have the right attitude and the right mindset. Stay tuned.
Hit the subscribe button and the bell notification to become part of the Transplant Helper community.
Hey folks, welcome to Transplant Helper again today. My name is Jim Merle, and today I'm kind of be going a little bit off the cuff. We're kind of just sitting down, having an open discussion right here, trying to be totally honest, trying to be transparent as far as the fact that living the post-transplant life can be a struggle, particularly when it comes to recovering from the surgery itself. Now, I don't care whether your heart, lung, liver, kidney, pancreas, whatever, if you have gone into failure to the extent that you've needed a transplant, you're going to be dealing with some level of difficult recovery. Now, for some of us, it may seem like a really, really long road. For others, it may seem like just no big deal. There's all those extremes in between as well. And so that's why I thought it would be appropriate to sit down and discuss this subject today. As a matter of fact, when we discuss the subject today, we're basically going to be viewing it from three different perspectives. One, we're going to be looking at the physical recovery, what it actually takes to recover from surgery, why your recovery may be going faster and or slower than someone else, that sort of thing. Then we're going to move into the emotional recovery, because there's no doubt the variants that exist in the physical recovery are not nearly the extreme variance that exists between the emotional recovery. Some of us deal with things very, very well. You might say that on one side, and it's just no big deal. It's difficult in the first few weeks, but after that, everything's fine. Others struggle daily with things like depression, PTSD, anxiety disorders. A lot of emotional problems come in as a result of having an organ transplant. And then thirdly, we're going to mention briefly in the end of this, because I think it's always necessary to balance things properly, we're going to talk about the spiritual recovery that you might be having in your transplant life. Are you looking to God for one thing, maybe more or less than you did before? You doubting God in this situation? I don't know how you'll feel about that, but we're going to get to it. That'll be over toward the end of the video. But let's start things off by talking about the physical recovery here, the physical recovery. And one of the things I always like to keep in mind when I'm considering my recovery, and also when I'm encouraging others to talk about their recovery, I like to remind you that you do not need, understand me, you do not need to measure your recovery success based on the person next to you. Now, I get it. We all share our lives. We all have open discussions at times where we talk about the ups and downs, the good, the bad, the ugly, that side of transplant. And I certainly like to be honest and transparent in doing so. But at the same time, I cannot look to someone beside me and say, well, you know what, I'm doing great because my recovery was twice as fast as theirs was. No, they're in different situations. Neither can I flip that over and say about someone beside me, well, I'm actually doing so poorly because look how quickly they bounce back. I mean, it seemed like it was nothing to them. They're back to work, back to life. And, what in the world's happening with me? Because there is no real accurate measurement of apples per apples, as we like to say, of what recovery ought to look like. Now, I try to encourage people by letting them know, particularly if you've had an organ transplant, maybe particularly if you've had something like heart or lungs. They seem to be the most difficult to recover from to an extent. But if you've had a heart or lung transplant, don't even try to expect that you're going to be back to 100% in less than a year. Now, I know there'll be some people who immediately chime in and say, oh no, 6 weeks out, 3 months out, I felt wonderful. Well, you perhaps would have or could have, but I say overall the recovery process from having such a major surgery can be upwards of the mark of a year. And I've told the story before. I'll mention it here in short, but I could remember thinking back through my first part of my recovery and how much I struggled for months and months and months. And then somewhere around that 9-month mark, looking back in hindsight, I realized that I was doing better. As a matter of fact, it was actually at the 1-year mark that I remember literally pulling the curtain back, stepping out of the shower, looking in the mirror, seeing my scar, and thinking to myself, Jim, you feel pretty good now. And I don't remember when it was exactly, somewhere between that 9 and 6 month mark, where it's like a breakthrough came, something just kind of snapped, and boom, I started feeling better. And that's not to say that I haven't had difficult days, maybe some bad days, some hard days since then. I certainly have, and I try to be honest about such. But it does mean, however, that there was that breakthrough moment. And even though I had many days prior to that point where I laid around on the couch and literally told my wife, I think I made a big mistake. I think I should have just kept the heart I had and just rode that out into the end, took the biggest wave I could and hoped for the best. But there was a breakthrough, and there was a point in time, again, it was between 9 and 12 months where I started feeling better. So the reason I bring that up is because if you're in a period, and I spoke with someone on the phone the other day, I really enjoyed the conversation, but they're not anywhere near that point post-transplant yet, and they're really frustrated because they've had setbacks, they've had hard days, they've got days where they don't feel like doing anything at all even yet. And I reminded that person, you're not even to that mark. I suggest that 1 year mark. You're not to that point yet. And because of some setbacks that did occur prior to surgery and post-surgery, you're going to be on a different curve than everyone else. So expect something different. So I'm just telling you that everyone's physical recovery is different. And depending on where you started on your journey and how your journey went as far as the surgery itself, maybe the first week or so after surgery, that dictates hugely the official end of the day outcome that may be out there at 6 months, 9 months, a year, or more than that. That has a huge impact on that. And I like to illustrate that by talking about what I know, which is my situation. This is just for example, 45 minutes after my transplant surgery, they pulled my breathing tube out because I was asking them to do that. So I was off the ventilator in 45 minutes, sitting up in a chair the same day, walking by that night next morning, so I had a tremendous, seemingly bounce back recovery, in and out of the ICU, the hospital, the whole 9 yards within a week or so. And it looked really good on the onset. But what people don't realize about that is that those things happened to me post-transplant, that seemingly extremely fast recovery because of what had happened prior to transplant. For example, the day that I got the word, I was in the hospital, had been waiting there about a month. The day I got the word, Jim, we have a heart for you potentially, I that day and over the course of that night walked 3 miles in the hallways, to the point that I was walking around hallways, walking laps there in the middle of the night because I was excited and anxious and just upset, whatever, over the whole transplant was actually happening. I was out walking the halls and met one of my doctors, and he literally looked at me and said, Jim, you can go get back in the bed. You don't have to walk anymore. Well, I wasn't walking for the heart I had. I was walking for the heart I was going to get. But I only say that because I want you to understand that I had an ability, a chance to do something that most don't. Many people, for example, I only had an IV pole. That's all I had. So I wasn't laying in an extremely intensive care type unit on an ECMO device or on a heart pump or anything of that sort that was going to hold me to the bed. If you're someone who's dealt with that and been through a time period for whatever reason where you're confined to the bed for weeks or months leading into transplant and you're not able to get up and exercise, then it's going to be a lot harder on the other side to get up out of that bed and to have the bounce back recovery seemingly that I had. So I'm saying physically, we cannot always measure apples per apples to see our situation versus someone else's because we don't know their situation. They may have had a whole lot harder road going in or a whole lot easier road going in than we do, so they're going to have a different road coming out. And you have to add to that, as I mentioned, the person I was speaking to the other day had some real setbacks very early on in their recovery. For example, C. diff, a week or two out of transplant, you got C. diff. That's extremely hard. And this person was blessed to even survive that. And so that kept them back for 3, 4, 5 months, slowed them down. So their recovery now out farther than that doesn't look as quick as maybe mine or the next person's, but it may be just as well because they have kind of started off on a slower pace. So physically, our recoveries are different. So physically, don't measure yourself by anyone else. Now, if you want to speak to one another and encourage one another, say, yeah, I'm doing great. Yeah, I do that. I go in rooms all the time and say, look, I had a fast recovery that doctors said that they've seen in 25 years, and you can do the same. I may tell them that the first day or two after transplant, but I always preface it with the fact that, but your recovery is going to be different. So on the physical, that's what it is. Secondarily to that, I mentioned on the emotional side of things. Now, all of us deal with tremendous emotions while the whole transplant process is going on. Pre-transplant, there's worry, anxiety, depression, all that comes in because it seems that you may lose your life, okay? That at the best case scenario, you're going to be going through a major surgery at some point. During the whole process, and I say this is probably the 24 hours-ish around the surgery right there, extreme emotional times because you're dealing with, anxiety, maybe depression, excitement, sadness. And I had a video back several months ago. It'll be old, but I'll link it up here anyway. I think I named 24 or 25 emotions that it seems like everybody goes through right in that 24-hour period. And then you come out of transplant, post-transplant, and then for days, weeks, or months, there's still that weird feeling about the whole situation. There's still some anxiety because, as I like to say, transplant is a treatment. It's not a cure, folks. So you're going to have bumps in the road, but there's still that anxiety. What if something happens to me? What if, even though it looks great now, what if I go into rejection? What if I have this problem or that? What if I catch some virus? And I don't like to think about all those anxious things, but it happens. And then the emotions that you deal with as far as especially in the case of heart and lungs, where you have to have a deceased donor, where you're looking back and saying, well, there's somebody lost their life, and I now have their organ, and how do I deal with that? How do I deal with, if you have contact with a donor family, which I'm blessed to have, how do I deal with those emotions? It's just a ball of emotions there that build up. You throw into that mix that we're on what I call the devil's jug, prednisone, which definitely changes and impacts our emotions tremendously. I can remember the doctor coming in. He was totally making a joke, but Dr. DeLodge came in shortly after my transplant. I had some very emotional ups and downs very quickly within the first few days, where I would be extremely angry, be crying the next moment, whatever. And Dr. DeLodge joked, this is a joke, and he said, Jim, didn't I tell you, you got a woman's heart? So you're going to have a woman's emotions. That actually wasn't true. He was just trying to lighten the mood, and I appreciated it, but that's kind of how we can be. You can be one person pre-transplant, one person post-transplant because of the real situations and also because of the medications. The medications can totally change your mindset. And so to take this a little bit farther, again, I talk with people all the time that because their physical recovery is not what they expect, they have difficulty with the emotional recovery. There's still a lot of depression and worry and anxiety. And as I mentioned, PTSD, I'll talk about that again in a moment, just a lot of sadness that goes around that post-transplant recovery when and if we feel like we are not doing as well as we expected. And again, situations arise. I won't call any specific names, but someone who's worked for 25 years in the same career or the same specific job, and then all of a sudden, boom, they're wiped out. They're not able to work. They're not recovering like they think. That is a very, very emotional time. It's a very hard thing to deal with because it's life-changing. Just face it. I mean, I've been on Social Security disability and out of work now for close to 10 years. And there are days when I'm thankful. I'm always thankful that I have that ability to, to draw some Social Security and to live and to survive and have insurance and all. But there are days when, man, if I could just go back into a real working job, if you want to call it that, and consistently perform every day, that would be so wonderful. It would take off so much stress and strain that comes with, living the transplant life, because to an extent, pre-transplant working was sort of my identity. It's something that I enjoyed, that I loved, that I excelled at, and then all at once that was just gone. The ability was lost. And so, yeah, I mean, the emotions there are very difficult. And just like with the physical, please do not ever measure where you're at emotionally against someone else. You may meet with someone in clinic, and I've seen these people in clinic face to face. I've seen these people certainly in Facebook groups on social media. Someone will mention that they're having a difficult time and feeling depressed, and someone will ultimately always chime in and say, well, I've not had any problems. I feel great. You should be thankful for your donor. Folks, I'm as thankful for my donor as anybody could be, but I have to remind myself, and listen to this carefully. I remind myself every day that I'm not living, if you will, for my donor. And I mean by that the word for, in place of my donor. I'm not living in place of them. I am living because of them. And so there is a extremely high level, you can't see my hands here, but a high level of gratitude that comes in with knowing that someone ultimately gave the gift of life to me, okay? In my case, his name was Dickie. Great, great, great guy. But I know that he gave his life for me. And I live, in a sense, I cannot live, I should say, in his place or for him, but I can live because of him. And so there's joy in my heart every day because of that. But joy and happiness, or joy up against depression, those can be separated things here. So there'll be hard days, there'll be difficult days, and because, Bob or Jane over here are not having the same days, maybe they claim they're upbeat all the time and you're feeling down all the time, or vice versa. They claim they're always down and you're sitting there shaking your head saying, I don't understand. I mean, what a wonderful gift you've gotten. You should be happy. Don't ever treat anybody like that. And again, I see that so many times on social media. Someone will put another down because they're not having the same emotional recovery as they are. Don't do that, folks. We're all different. We all deal with things differently. We all go down a journey in a different way, especially when it comes to the emotions. It may be that you could say heart transplants recovery, basically 9 to 12 months, like I said. You might say that. But the emotional differences there are so varied. And a lot of that has to do with what that person was dealing with, what was going on in their life going into that. Again, if you're a person like I was blessed to be, or lucky, whatever you want to call it, who was able to go into transplant, still, even the day of transplant, getting out of my bed, walking, exercising, having some small, albeit it was in a hospital, but some small quality of life, then going into transplant, I'm not going to be as emotionally damaged, and I don't know if that's really the term to use, but I'm not going to have the baggage to carry along that someone has that went into transplant after, like one of my friends who was in the hospital for 5 months straight, who was confined to the bed, the whole bedpan trauma, the monitors and IV bags everywhere, and the ECMO devices and the pumps and all that was going into saving their lives, just postponing the inevitable, if you will, leading into transplant. Man, they're going to have a lot worse time, a lot more difficult time post-transplant, because they dealt with so much before. And there may be horrifying nightmares that they awaken from, where they don't, they feel like they're back in that ICU and back hooked up to all those machines and back confined to that bed. And that's kind of what PTSD is about, just one facet of it. But I'll just be honest with you. I've dealt with, and will deal with at some point, some level of depression, mild to moderate. I've dealt with some symptoms of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I've had whole videos on that. I'll link it up here in the description as well. That right there, it can cause you to emotionally put up barriers between you and someone else. I know for me, to be honest, when I was waiting for transplant for that last month in the hospital, my hospital staff kind of became my new family, because that's who I was with, who I was spending the most time with, who felt like understood me and I them. My family, on the other hand, even though they were there for me constantly, they loved me the same or even more than ever. I kind of started to build a wall. I started to put up a separating wall between me and them, because in my mind, I had to go ahead and make that break. I assumed and thought that possibly I could die, and that's what the doctors were saying at least, and I had to go ahead and kind of make that break and build that wall so that I myself could deal with facing death, and then maybe that they could deal with me dying. And, some of that still remains. I told someone the other day on the phone again, I said, look, I've got friends, great friends that I had pre-transplant that are not necessarily my friends post-transplant. It's not that we don't like each other anymore or care about each other at all. It's just the fact that it's like something changed. It changed with them because they didn't know how to handle my situation. It changed with me because maybe I either didn't like the way they handled my situation, or, it just got to where, I put up the wall where I divided and went ahead and broke some ties with them so that we could both deal with whatever the outcome would be. So all of that balled up already so far to say we're going to recover at different physical paces. Don't measure yourself against someone else. Just do your thing. We're going to recover at different emotional paces. Same thing. Don't measure yourself against someone else. Do the best that you can, and don't be disappointed or downtrodden or discouraged by whatever emotion you're dealing with. Your emotions, roll with it. If you need to get help, counseling, see your physician, be open about it, be honest, don't be ashamed. All that applies. But then thirdly here as well, we need to consider the spiritual recovery that we make. And I get it. Not everyone has the same faith, if you want to call it that. That means belief, reliance, the ability to lean on God that I do. And I believe in the God of heaven. I believe in the one and only true God. That's the one I worship. That's the one I serve. That's the one I follow. You may think something totally different, okay? But I want to encourage you that what you're doing, especially if you're giving homage to God, don't be discouraged or encouraged by how you feel post-transplant. This is sort of emotional, but it's also much more spiritual. I met with people that as they go through the transplant journey, maybe they start out, they trust, rely, believe, have faith in, all those same words, in God. And then because of their hard days, because of their extremely difficult struggles in the first two, physically and emotionally, they get to a point where spiritually there gets to be a wall between them and God. And they get to a place spiritually where they begin to say, you know what, why isn't God doing this differently? Why isn't He allowing me to have life a lot easier than this? Why isn't He, allowing, I see them all the time, people especially who are waiting for transplant, maybe God doesn't want me to live. Maybe that's why I hadn't got the transplant. All those emotions come in. I see a lot of people who need a spiritual recovery. They've gotten frustrated, put out with, discouraged, disappointed in God, and they need a spiritual recovery. They need to understand that whatever they're going through in life is ultimately in God's plan. It may not agree with your human plan and our finite minds that are so far apart from God. But at the end of the day, you're going down the journey that He has set in front of you. You're following, as the Hebrews writer says, you're going through the race that is, quote, again, set before you. It's your race. And there may be a point in which you need to make a spiritual recovery where you just need to stop arguing with God, stop blaming God, stop, being upset with God, and just say, look, I'm in your race. I'm going to run it as far as I'm able to, and I'm looking to you the whole entire time. Now, if you want to turn that coin over, because we've turned all the others over, turn it over. I see people sometimes who are so holy into God with what they say. I trust God, I believe God, I pray to God, God's got this, God's good all the times, things. They say so much of that, but the question is, do they believe it in their heart? Their heart of hearts, their minds, their souls, do you believe that? Because even Jesus spoke of those who He said were, speak of me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And so if you're going to make this journey complete, I believe, whole, your recovery physically matters, okay? Your recovery emotionally matters, but more than those, your recovery spiritually matters. This is a wonderful gift. Think about the technology. Think about the knowledge. Think about the wisdom. Think about the learning that has gone into the whole 50 plus years of transplants even being a possibility. And how that all of that, all those blessings have lined up because of God. And he's allowed those medical personnel, those doctors, those surgeons, those care members to have the experience and the knowledge to do this. And then in that, he's aligned for you to have a potential donor and to have the life expectancy to get to that donor, and then to have the life, whatever it is that comes after that. I'm 6.5 years post. And I'm extremely thankful for that. I look for the day when I can, tie or break the record for transplant longevity and cross that 40 some odd year mark now. But if I don't, and if 6.5 years is near about the end of that, okay. Spiritually, I still honor my God. Spiritually, I still give myself to Him. Now again, I told you in the onset, this is kind of going to be an open type discussion. The only way to make that possible is comment in the comments below. Tell us about your journey. You can pick 1 or 2 or 3 of those things, physical, emotional, spiritual. Tell us about some of your journey, a portion of your journey, all or little of it. Share that. Because we're not measuring ourselves by someone else necessarily, but to see anything that's encouraging beneath this videos is tremendous. And even sometimes the negative. Someone writes in the comments and says, look, physically, I'm not anywhere near where I need to be. I'm so weak. I don't have strength. Emotionally, I'm just a mess. Spiritually, I've given up on God. If someone writes that in the comments, guess what? In my mind, and my mind may be a little bit squirmy here, but in my mind, that can be encouraging, because there's going to be another person who does not comment, who reads the comment, who says, yeah, that's me. Yes, I've been there too. And then I assume most of the majority of comments below this video will be about the great recoveries. It'll be about the great, milestones that have been met, the triumphs that have been whatever you call that have been achieved. And there'll be people reading the comments who don't feel anything like that, who will read your comment and say, wow, it is possible. There is a possibility out there for an opportunity of recovery. And then guess what, folks? Then we join hands together. We put our arms around one another. And I'm giving you a big hug right now if you don't know that. But we put our arms around one another and we do this together. I don't call this the Transplant Helper, that's what's on the shirt, community, without the fact that that's what I want it to be. I want it to be a community, and it is. I know it seems to come down to my little introduction. Hit the subscribe button and the bell notification to become part of the Transplant Helper community. I know it seems like that sometimes, but it is so much more than that. You can get the t-shirt and wear it. They're linked below. You can act like a transplant helper when you're in clinic. You can sit down with someone and encourage them and educate them, and you can advocate for organ donation. Advocate, educate, motivates what I like to do. You can do all of that. You can be a part of the Transplant Helper community. You can be a part of the community in the comments. You can be a part of the community on social media. You can be a part of the community in any way, but just by living your life and recovering in your own way. I wish you the very best. KOKO, and until I see you again, stay stronger, friends.